Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington has had very good talks with Iran and suggested the chance of reaching a deal is high. Iran says it's reviewing the U.S. proposal to end the war and that it will share its position with Pakistani mediators after consultations. The damaged Korean vessel that caught fire in the Strait of Hormuz earlier this week is expected to arrive at Dubai port as early as today. Authorities plan to begin a full investigation into the cause of an unexplained explosion after the vessel docks. President Lee Jae-myung has said there's no reason to oppose the constitutional amendment bill ahead of a vote later today at the National Assembly. The bill, backed by the ruling Democratic Party and 5 minor parties, focuses on strengthening parliamentary control over martial law. U.S. President Donald Trump said talks with Iran are moving in a positive direction and suggested a deal could be reached within a week. Reports also say Tehran is considering a 14-point MOU to end the war, which includes the transfer of highly enriched uranium to the United States. Our Kim Jun-ong starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Wednesday that talks with Iran are progressing well and that the chance of reaching a deal is high. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump reaffirmed Washington's long-standing position that Tehran should not possess nuclear weapons. He also said that Iran had agreed to abandon nuclear ambitions, a claim that Iran has not yet confirmed.
In the case of Iran, we're not going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon. We're not going to let that happen, and we won't let that happen.
He added that the United States will see whether Iran can make a deal that is satisfactory to Washington, and said the situation is very much under control. CNN reported on the same day that Washington and Tehran are discussing a possible MOU aimed at ending the war. According to the report, a one-page proposal currently under internal discussion includes a temporary halt to Iran's uranium enrichment program, the unfreezing of Iranian assets, and guarantees for security in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump also told reporters that any deal would require Tehran to transfer its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to the United States and shut down its underground nuclear facilities. Iran said it is still reviewing the U.S. proposal. A foreign ministry spokesperson quoted by Iran's ISNA news agency said Tehran will relay its official position to Pakistani mediators after internal consultations. But the spokesperson dismissed reports that a final agreement is close, calling some of the media coverage speculative. Trump said the deal could be finalized before his planned trip to China next week, but warned that military action could resume if the negotiations fall through. Kim Jun-ong, Arirang News.
Korean shipping firm HMM says its bulk carrier Damu, which caught fire following an explosion in the Strait of Hormuz earlier this week, is expected to arrive at Dubai port as early as Thursday. A full investigation into the cause of the explosion will begin after the vessel docks. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
A South Korean-operated bulk carrier stranded in the Strait of Hormuz for more than 2 months is now being towed toward Dubai after an engine room explosion and fire left the vessel disabled at sea on Monday. The ship's owner, HMM, said it contracted a company in the United Arab Emirates to tow the HMM Namu, with the ship expected to arrive at Dubai port as early as Thursday. Once docked, authorities will begin a full investigation into the cause of the unexplained explosion and fire. The investigation is also expected to examine claims made by U.S. President Donald Trump that the ship may have acted independently inside the restricted area near the Strait of Hormuz. HMM denied those allegations, stating that the ship had been waiting near the control line for restrictions to be lifted, but was not within the expanded control zone.
From the shipping company's perspective, safety is guaranteed only when Iran clearly demonstrates it will not attack. Therefore, they do not immediately attempt passage when such assurances are unclear.
The company also noted that hundreds of vessels, including 4 operated by HMM, were in the area at the time, making any unilateral movement unlikely. South Korea's Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries plans to dispatch investigators, including officials from the Korea Maritime Safety Tribunal, to determine the exact cause of the accident. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So the Korean government says it's taking all necessary measures to determine the exact cause and circumstances of the explosion on a South Korean-operated cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz. For more on this, we're joined today by Dr. Lee Ji-soo, visiting researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies. Dr. Lee, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning.
So before we get into details about the Korean vessel, Iran says it's reviewing the U.S. proposal to end the war, while President Donald Trump says it's very possible that Washington will make a deal with Tehran. What do you make of the latest developments?
I would say what we're seeing right now is a cautious opening rather than a real breakthrough. On the Iranian side, saying they're reviewing a U.S. proposal is a very deliberate choice of words. It signals that they're not rejecting diplomacy outright, but they're also not committing to anything yet. Tehran typically uses this kind of language to buy time, assess internal consensus, and gauge how serious Washington really is. On the U.S. side, describing a deal as very possible reflects a political willingness to engage, but it doesn't necessarily mean the hard issues have been resolved. So at this stage, I'd frame it as both sides testing the waters. There's a mutual interest in avoiding escalation, especially given the broader regional tensions and economic pressures, but there's also a deep trust deficit that hasn't gone away. What will really matter going forward is whether this rhetoric translates into structured negotiations. Without that, these kinds of statements can quickly fade without producing tangible results. President Trump has said that Iran has agreed to give up its nuclear weapons, and he also suggested that a deal could be reached within a week. However, Iran has not issued any official response to these remarks, so at this point, the outcome remains unclear. So overall, it's slightly more optimistic tone than before, but it is not a concrete deal.
Right, we'll have to see if they do reach a deal within this week. Authorities are investigating an explosion on the South Korean-operated cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz earlier this week. So could Iran have deliberately targeted the Korean vessel?
I'll be very cautious about jumping to the conclusion that Iran deliberately targeted the Korean vessel, at least at this stage. What we know so far is that there was an explosion and fire on a South Korean-operated ship in the Strait of Hormuz, but the cause is still under investigation. On the one hand, the Iranian embassy in Seoul has officially denied any involvement in the fire on the vessel. That's a clear diplomatic position, and it suggests Tehran wants to avoid direct escalation, especially with a country like South Korea, which is not a direct party to the current tensions. However, Iranian state media said that a South Korean vessel had been targeted, which clearly contradicts the position of the Iranian embassy. It's possible that different actors, such as official channels and state-linked media, are sending slightly different signals, one aimed at de-escalation internationally, the other aimed at domestic or strategic messaging. So we're looking at a highly volatile environment where facts are still unclear, narratives are competing, and attribution is extremely sensitive. Until the investigation is complete, it's best to see this less as a confirmed targeted attack and more as a reflection of just how unstable the security situation in the Gulf has become right now.
I see. And President Trump also says the Korean-operated cargo ship was attacked by Iran after it chose to navigate the waterway alone. So with him saying there has been major progress toward an agreement with Iran, how do you assess the potential repercussions once the cause of this explosion involving the vessel is identified?
I think the key point here is that everything depends on attribution. Who ultimately held responsible for that explosion? If the investigation clearly proves that Iran was directly responsible, then the repercussion could be quite serious. At the same time, it could complicate the diplomatic track. Right now, there are signals of possible progress toward the deal, but if Iran is seen as directly targeting commercial shipping, that would undermine trust. And there's another possibility. If the cause turns out to be unclear, accidental, or indirect, if it linked to the broader conflict environment rather than a deliberate targeting, then the impact may be more contained. In that case, both sides might actually use the incident as a reminder of how risky the situation has become. Also, regarding President Trump's comment that the ship was attacked because it was navigating alone, that reflects a broader reality. And then it means ships operating without coordination or protection are inherently more vulnerable regardless of intent. So, in short, if it is confirmed as a deliberate attack, it raises the risk of escalation and slows diplomacy. And if not, it reinforces the urgency of reaching some kind of agreement. Either way, it highlights a bigger issue. It means that the Strait of Hormuz has become a space where miscalculation alone can trigger wider consequences, and that's what makes this decision particularly dangerous right now.
And this incident, the explosion in the Strait of Hormuz, has now put South Korea in a very tricky position over, its role in helping reopen the Strait of Hormuz, as the United States continues to pressure South Korea to join efforts to secure transit in the waterway. So how should South Korea respond?
I think South Korea is in a really sensitive position here, and the key is balance. South Korea has a clear interest in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and secure. A significant portion of its energy imports passes through that route, so stability there is not just a foreign policy issue. It's directly tied to economic security. Seoul also has to be careful not to be seen as taking sides in a highly sensitive regional conflict. Joining U.S.-led security efforts too visibly or too aggressively could complicate its relation with Iran and potentially expose Korean assets to greater risk. So rather than choosing one side outright, I think Korea is likely to pursue a measured, layered approach. First, Korea can support maritime security in a limited and defensive way, for example, focusing on protecting its own vessels, sharing information, and cooperating on de-escalation rather than participating in any offensive posture. Also, diplomacy will be crucial. South Korea has traditionally maintained relatively balanced relations in the region, and it can use the position to emphasize de-escalation, dialogue, and the protection of civilian shipping. And finally, Seoul will probably continue to coordinate closely with Washington, but in a way that reflects its own national interests. So overall, the best response is not a dramatic shift, but a carefully calculated strategy.
I see. All right. Thank you so much for your time and insight this morning, Dr. Lee. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
President Lee Jae-myung has shared his support for a parliamentary vote scheduled to take place later today, aimed at amending the Constitution. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jit reports.
An amendment that there is no reason to oppose. That's how President Lee Jae-myung described the constitutional amendment bill ahead of a National Assembly vote on Thursday.
1987년에 현행 헌법이 제정된 이후 대한민국이 정치, 경제, 사회 여러 측면에서 참으로 큰 변화를 겪었습니다. 그런데 헌법은 여전히 지난 40여 년 동안 제자리 걸음입니다.
Chairing a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Lee said constitutional amendments should move forward step by step, starting with changes that have public and bipartisan support. The centerpiece of the amendment bill, jointly backed by 187 lawmakers from the ruling Democratic Party and 5 minor parties, is tighter parliamentary control over martial law. A president declaring martial law would need approval from the National Assembly within 48 hours. Otherwise, the measure would automatically lose effect. Currently, even if lawmakers vote to demand its lifting, the president still has the final authority to formally revoke it, leaving room for delays. In former President Yoon Suk-yeol's case in 2024, it took more than 3 hours.
계엄 상황도 아닌데 불법적으로 정권 유지를 목적으로 또는 사이익을 목적으로 계엄을 선포해서 군대를 통해서 나라를 망치면서 독재를 하겠다. 이런 것을 못하게 하는 게 당연한 거 아닌가요?
The proposed amendment would also add the 1980 May 18th Gwangju democratization movement and the 1979 Busan-Masan democratic protests to the Constitution's preamble. The current preamble only references the April 19th revolution of 1960 in recognizing Korea's democratic history. If approved by the National Assembly, the amendment could be put to a national referendum alongside the local elections on June 3rd. And with less than a month left until the local elections, the president called on his cabinet to remain vigilant, saying voters must be able to make informed decisions.
선거인들이 자유롭게 선거에 관한 후보에 관한 정보를 수집하고 그 정보에 의해서 합리적인 판단을 할 수 있도록 하는 것은 정부의 가장 큰 책무라고 생각이 됩니다.
He specifically warned against smear campaigns, vote buying, and unlawful interference by public officials.
Regarding these three major election crimes, President Lee ordered relevant authorities to respond swiftly and firmly. 송유진, Arirang News.
The Seoul High Court is set to deliver an appellate ruling later today for former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who was sentenced to 23 years in prison over his alleged role in the December 3rd martial law declaration. The appeal centers on whether the martial law declaration constituted insurrection, along with the extent of Han's involvement and responsibility. Prosecutors argue Han failed to stop former President Yoon Suk-yeol from abusing presidential power despite serving as the nation's second highest-ranking official. Han is also accused of signing a post-dated martial law decree and later requesting its destruction. Prosecutors are seeking the same 23-year prison sentence handed down in the first trial. The trial will be broadcast live. As speculation grows over a potential resumption of diplomacy between the U.S. and North Korean leaders, one leading U.S. scholar says talks to tackle Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions require a new and realistic approach. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
Talks with North Korea should start with risk reduction rather than immediate denuclearization, cooling tensions to avoid a nuclear war. That's according to Victor Cha, Korea chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and former deputy head of the US delegation to the six-party talks. In a recent Foreign Affairs article, Cha makes a case for seeking cold peace with North Korea.
The idea behind the cold peace is that we're much better off avoiding the chances of a hot nuclear war with North Korea and trying to open a cold peace. And the cold peace doesn't completely negate the goal of denuclearization, but acknowledges that it's not something that's going to happen anytime soon when North Korea has 50 nuclear weapons and, is fast on their way to building many, many more.
After decades of policy centered on putting denuclearization first, Cha says the priority should instead be lowering the risk of nuclear escalation.
Arms control would be the idea that we're not going to get denuclearization with North Korea anytime soon, but we could try to negotiate a reduction in the number of missiles that they're deploying, in particular long-range ballistic missiles, an end to testing of whether it's nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles, a ban on production of additional weapons-grade fissile material, and a non-proliferation pledge that North Korea would not proliferate to other countries.
But how to get North Korea on board is the question, even if US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un resume their talks, which have stalled since 2019. Sanctions pressure has weakened, with China and Russia no longer fully enforcing restrictions, while the war in Ukraine has led to deeper military cooperation with Moscow.
As part of a cold peace strategy, the United States would have to think of ways to try to sever that link, because that tie between Russia and North Korea is most likely giving North Korea the capabilities to pose an even greater threat to the U.S. homeland, with more capable intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as potentially nuclear submarines.
Cha says that seeking cold peace with North Korea would not mean weaker deterrence. Seoul, Washington and Tokyo would still expand their missile defense systems and deepen defense industrial cooperation, while maintaining clear consequences if North Korea uses nuclear weapons. With growing speculation over Trump's North Korea diplomacy, a White House official said on Monday that there is no North Korea-US summit currently scheduled during the president's Asia trip this month. But Washington remains open to dialogue without any preconditions. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-han, and this is The World Now. The cruise ship at the center of a deadly Hantavirus outbreak left Cape Verde on Wednesday and is now heading to Spain's Canary Islands. It is expected to arrive in Tenerife in 3 days. 3 more patients have been evacuated from the ship, 2 of them in serious condition. The MV Hondias is carrying nearly 150 people, none of whom are currently showing symptoms of the disease. Spain's health minister said once the ship docks, non-Spanish passengers will be repatriated to their home countries, while 14 Spanish nationals on board will be quarantined at a military hospital in Madrid. 8 cases in total have been recorded and 5 confirmed by laboratory testing. 3 people have died. The WHO's top epidemic expert said the risk to the wider public remains low and stressed that this is not the next COVID. Israel struck a target in Beirut on Wednesday for the first time since agreeing to a ceasefire with Hezbollah last month. Israel said it was targeting a commander of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force in the city's southern suburbs. Israeli media reported the commander was killed, though neither the IDF nor Hezbollah immediately confirmed it. Lebanon's health ministry said separate Israeli strikes in the south of the country killed 4 more people. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli strikes critically wounded the son of Hamas's top negotiator and killed at least 5 others. In the U.S., Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told congressional investigators he cannot explain why he and his family had lunch on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's private island in 2012. His answers on Wednesday contradict his past public statements about cutting ties with Epstein years earlier. Lutnick had previously claimed he distanced himself from Epstein around 2005 after an uncomfortable encounter. Justice Department files released in January showed the 2012 island visit and emails showing Lutnick later invited Epstein to a 2015 fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. Ted Turner, the media mogul who launched CNN, died on Wednesday at the age of 87. He had been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia in 2018. Turner pioneered 24-hour TV news with CNN and built a media empire before selling Turner Broadcasting to Time Warner for $7.3 billion in 1996. In his later years, he devoted his fortune to philanthropy, donating $1 billion to United Nations charities and conservation groups.
Skies over the capital and surrounding areas are being filled with passing clouds this morning. Rain is expected to move into the central regions later this afternoon, making for a cooler day overall. Rainfall will be very light with around 5 millimeters across the central regions and parts of western Jeollabuk-do province. So as for the capital region, temperatures will not rise much this afternoon, with gusty winds keeping conditions on the cooler side. And Parents' Day tomorrow looks like it's going to be even breezier than today. For a closer look at today's afternoon's high, Seoul will be getting up to 21 degrees Celsius. Daejeon, Gwangju will make it to 24 degrees. Meanwhile, southern provinces will continue to have early summer-like weather under sunnier skies. Daegu will make it to 27 degrees, Gyeongju at 26 degrees Celsius. And air quality will be normal to good nationwide all day today. Then a few light showers are possible in Gangwon-do province tomorrow. Then heading into the weekend, skies will turn mostly sunny again, with temperatures rebounding to typical spring levels. So please beware of big temperature gaps between lows and highs and do dress accordingly.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.